I never thought I'd be sitting in the corner of my own family's Thanksgiving table, like some unwelcome stranger, watching my relatives feast on turkey bought with money they'd stolen from my business. But there I was, relegated to a folding chair, squeezed between the coat closet and the kids' table, listening to my sister boast about her new Mercedes, while my phone buzzed with a call that would change everything. My name is Elena Marchetti, and what started as family humiliation turned into the most satisfying business revenge of my career. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 31, I'd built Marchetti Consulting from nothing into a 7-figure enterprise specializing in corporate restructuring. My clients included Fortune 500 companies, and I had a reputation for turning failing businesses into profitable ventures. What I didn't know was that my own family had been treating my success as their personal ATM, and Thanksgiving dinner was about to become their reckoning. The morning started like every holiday for the past 5 years since Mom passed. I drove from my penthouse in downtown Chicago to the old family home in Naperville, arms loaded with expensive wine and gourmet appetizers that nobody would appreciate. My father, Vincent, had remarried 2 years ago to Patricia, a woman who made no secret of her disdain for my success. She'd moved her 3 adult children into our family dynamic, and somehow I'd become the outsider in my own childhood home. Walking into the house, I immediately noticed the changes. New furniture everywhere, a massive flat-screen TV dominating the living room, and Patricia's daughter Jessica showing off diamond earrings that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. My stepbrother Marcus was bragging about his recent trip to Europe, while Patricia's youngest, Amanda, live-streamed herself with a phone that still had the Apple Store sticker on it. The renovated kitchen gleamed with granite countertops and top-of-the-line appliances. Even the dining room had been completely redone with a table that could seat 20 people. Yet when it came time to sit down, Patricia had somehow arranged the seating so that I was squeezed into a corner spot at a card table they'd set up as an extension. "Oh, Elena, sorry about the seating," Patricia said with fake sweetness, her voice dripping with condescension. "We just didn't have room at the main table. You understand? Being single and all, you don't really need as much space." The insult stung, but what bothered me more was how my father said nothing, just avoided eye contact as he carved the turkey. Jessica, Patricia's eldest, was particularly venomous. She'd never worked a day in her life but had opinions about everything, especially my career. "Must be nice having all that money and no family to spend it on," she commented, her new designer handbag casually displayed on the chair beside her. Some people just prioritize differently, I guess. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that family was family, even when they treated you like garbage. My younger brother Tony, the only blood relative I had left besides Dad, shot me apologetic looks from across the room, but he'd always been too weak to stand up to Patricia's reign of terror. The conversation at the main table centered around everyone's recent purchases and vacation plans. Marcus talked about his new boat, Amanda gushed about her upcoming semester in Paris, and Jessica described the interior designer she'd hired for her apartment. Meanwhile, I sat in my corner, pushing sweet potatoes around my plate and wondering how my family had become so materialistic. That's when my phone started buzzing insistently. The caller ID showed Sarah Mitchell, executive assistant, and I knew she wouldn't interrupt family time unless it was urgent. I'd hired Sarah 6 months ago after my previous assistant retired, and she'd proven invaluable in managing my growing business. "I'm sorry, I need to take this," I said, standing up from my makeshift table. Patricia rolled her eyes dramatically. "Of course you do. Work is always more important than family, isn't it, Elena?" She said loud enough for everyone to hear. I stepped into Dad's old study, closing the door behind me. "Sarah, this better be important. I'm in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner." "Elena, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I've been going through the quarterly financial reports, and I found some irregularities I think you need to know about immediately." Sarah's voice was tense, which was unusual for her typically calm demeanor. "What kind of irregularities?" I asked, settling into Dad's leather chair. "It's about the Hartman Industries contract. You know, the one your father helped negotiate. Last spring? There are some discrepancies in the payment structure that don't match what we agreed to." My blood ran cold. The Hartman deal had been my biggest contract of the year, worth over $2 million. Dad had insisted on helping with the negotiations, claiming his 40 years in business gave him valuable insight. I'd reluctantly agreed, thinking it might be a good bonding experience. "What exactly are you seeing, Sarah?" "Well, according to our records, Hartman was supposed to pay us directly for all consulting services, but I've discovered that 30% of their payments have been going to something called VMC Holdings instead of Marchetti Consulting. And Elena, VMC Holdings is registered to your father's address." The room started spinning. I gripped, the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" "I've triple-checked everything. VMC Holdings was established 2 weeks before the Hartman contract was finalized. Your father is listed as the sole owner and beneficiary. Elena, they've been skimming $600,000 from your biggest client." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I closed my eyes, trying to process what Sarah was telling me. The new furniture, the cars, the vacations, the expensive gifts everyone was flaunting. It all made horrible sense now. My own father had been stealing from my business, and apparently Patricia's children were benefiting from it. "There's more," Sarah continued. "I did some digging into other contracts your father was involved in. The Morrison Group deal, the Peterson merger consultation, the Bradley Holdings restructuring. They all show similar patterns. Money being diverted to various shell companies registered to your family members." My hands were shaking now. "How much are we talking about? Total? Conservatively? Over $1.5 million across the past 18 months. Elena, this isn't just theft. This is organized fraud involving multiple parties." I thought about every contract Dad had insisted on helping with, every negotiation where he'd suggested improvements to the payment structure. He'd used my trust and his business experience to systematically rob me while I was busy building my company's reputation. "Sarah, I need you to document everything. Every transaction, every shell company, every forged signature. Create a comprehensive report with all supporting evidence." "I'm already on it. Elena, I have to ask, did you authorize any of these alternate payment arrangements?" "Absolutely not. I had no knowledge of any of this." My voice was getting louder, and I realized I needed to control my emotions. "Sarah, this is clearly corporate fraud on a massive scale. We're going to need to involve law enforcement. I've already prepared preliminary reports for both the FBI's white-collar crime division and the Illinois State Attorney's Office. I just needed your authorization to proceed." The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent my career helping companies recover from internal fraud and embezzlement, and now I was the victim of the exact same crimes. The difference was that this time it was personal. This time, the criminals were my own family. "Send me everything you have. I'm going to confront them right now." "Elena, be careful. If they know you're onto them, they might try to destroy evidence or move assets offshore." I looked through the study window at my family, still chatting and laughing around the dinner table, completely unaware that their world was about to collapse. "Don't worry, Sarah. They have no idea what's coming." After hanging up, I sat in Dad's chair for several minutes, trying to organize my thoughts. The betrayal cut deeper than any business setback I'd ever experienced. These weren't competitors or strangers trying to steal from me. These were the people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally. I thought about all the Times I'd questioned Patricia's sudden wealth, all the expensive purchases that didn't match anyone's legitimate income. I'd convinced myself that maybe Dad had made some smart investments, or Patricia had family money she'd never mentioned. The truth was so much worse than anything I'd imagined. Standing up, I straightened my blazer and prepared to return to the dining room. But this time, I wouldn't be the family disappointment sitting in the corner. This time, I would be Elena Marchetti, CEO and fraud investigator, about to expose the biggest case of my career. The laughter from the dining room seemed obscene now, knowing it was funded by money stolen from my company. Patricia's children were literally wearing my success while treating me like an unwelcome guest. My father, the man who'd taught me about honesty and hard work, had been running a sophisticated embezzlement scheme using my own business as his personal piggy bank. I pulled out my phone and quickly texted Sarah. Proceed with all reports. File everything with authorities first thing tomorrow morning. This family dinner is about to become a confession session. Her response came immediately. Evidence is secured. Good luck, Elena. They have no idea who they're dealing with. Walking back toward the dining room, I could hear Patricia holding court about her plans for a kitchen remodel. We're thinking Italian marble countertops and a wine cellar in the basement. Vincent says we should enjoy life while we can. Marcus was showing off photos from his European vacation, describing expensive restaurants and luxury hotels. The suite in Monaco was incredible. Dad said we deserved to travel in style after working so hard this year. I paused in the doorway, watching my family celebrate their stolen wealth. None of them had worked hard for anything. They'd simply found a way to funnel my earnings into their accounts while making me feel like the unsuccessful family member who couldn't afford their lifestyle. Taking a deep breath, I walked back to my corner table, but this time with a very different attitude. I wasn't the family charity case anymore. I was a successful businesswoman who'd just discovered that her relatives were running a criminal enterprise, and I had all the evidence needed to destroy them. Everything okay with work? Tony asked, genuinely concerned. He was the only one who'd ever shown real interest in my career. Actually, everything's perfect, I replied, reaching for my wine glass. My assistant just called with some very interesting information about my business contracts. Apparently, there have been some unusual financial arrangements that I wasn't aware of. I watched Dad's face carefully. For just a moment, his fork paused halfway to his mouth, and I saw a flicker of something. Fear, guilt, recognition. But he quickly recovered, continuing to eat as if nothing had happened. Patricia, however, couldn't resist taking another shot. Well, maybe if you paid more attention to your business instead of working all the time, you'd know what's going on with your own company. The comment was so ironic it almost made me laugh. If only she knew that I'd been paying very close attention and her entire lifestyle was about to come crashing down. You're absolutely right, Patricia, I said calmly. I should definitely pay more attention to where my money goes. In fact, I think it's time I took a much more hands-on approach to my business finances. Jessica smirked from across the room. Maybe you should hire a better accountant. Successful people usually know how to manage their money properly. Funny you should mention that, I replied, taking another sip of wine. My assistant just discovered some very creative accounting in my recent contracts. It seems like someone has been quite innovative with payment structures. This time, Dad definitely looked uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and changed the subject to football, but I could see sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the cool November weather. The rest of dinner passed in a surreal haze. I sat in my corner, watching my family enjoy their stolen luxury while making plans for how to handle the aftermath of their inevitable arrests. They had no idea that within 24 hours, their world would explode in a spectacular display of justice and consequences. As Patricia served dessert, an expensive tiramisu from a gourmet bakery, I couldn't help but smile. Tomorrow, she'd be eating prison food. Tonight, I would let them have their last taste of the high life they'd built on lies and theft. My phone buzzed with another text from Sarah. Federal agents are standing by for tomorrow morning. All evidence has been submitted. Are you safe? I typed back quickly. Perfect. They have no idea what's coming. This is going to be the most memorable Thanksgiving they've ever had. Looking around the table at my unsuspecting family, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad. It's getting even through the legal system, with interest, penalties, and criminal charges included. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp November air that usually filled me with energy and purpose. But today, as I sat in my penthouse office overlooking Lake Michigan, I felt something different. A cold determination that comes from knowing you're about to deliver justice to people who never saw it coming. Sarah had arrived at 6 a.m. sharp, her arms loaded with manila folders and an expression that mixed professional excitement with personal satisfaction. The federal agents will be here at 9, she announced, spreading documents across my conference table like a general planning a military campaign. I've prepared separate evidence packets for the FBI, the Illinois State Attorney, and the IRS. Elena, what your family did isn't just theft. It's a sophisticated white-collar crime operation that spans multiple jurisdictions. I poured myself a second cup of coffee, my hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. After years of helping other companies recover from internal fraud, I was finally on the other side of the equation, and the irony wasn't lost on me. Walk me through everything one more time. I want to understand exactly how they pulled this off. Sarah opened the first folder, revealing bank statements, contract modifications, and incorporation documents that painted a picture of calculated betrayal. It started 18 months ago when your father suggested helping with the Morrison group consultation. Remember how he insisted on streamlining the payment process to make things easier for the client? I nodded, remembering how proud I'd been that Dad wanted to be more involved in my business. He'd spent decades in manufacturing before retiring, and I'd thought his experience could add value to my consulting practice. Instead, he'd been studying my operations to find weaknesses he could exploit. The Morrison contract was supposed to pay Marchetti Consulting directly, but your father convinced them to split payments between your company and something called Vintage Management Corporation, VMC. He told them it was a subsidiary handling specialized services. Sarah pulled out incorporation papers. VMC was registered to Patricia's maiden name 3 days before the Morrison contract was signed. The betrayal felt fresh all over again, but this time it was mixed with professional admiration for the sophistication of their scheme. They weren't just stealing randomly. This was planned, organized fraud. Exactly, and it gets worse. After VMC was established, your father started approaching your other clients directly, claiming there had been administrative changes in how Marchetti Consulting processed payments. He used official company letterhead he had access to because you trusted him. Sarah showed me copies of letters bearing my company logo, written in Dad's distinctive handwriting, but signed with a forged version of my signature. Each letter instructed major clients to redirect portions of their payments to various shell companies, all registered to different family members. Patricia's son Marcus controls Apex Holdings, which has been receiving payments from the Hartman Industries contract. Jessica runs Sterling Enterprises, which collected money from the Bradley Holdings restructuring project. Even Amanda, who's only 22, has a company called Meridian Solutions that's been skimming from smaller clients. I studied the incorporation documents, noting how each shell company was established just days before the corresponding contracts were modified. This wasn't opportunistic theft. It was a coordinated family business built on defrauding my legitimate business. The most sophisticated part is how they laundered the money, Sarah continued, opening another folder. Instead of just depositing the stolen funds into personal accounts, they created fake invoices for consulting services, marketing expenses, and administrative fees. On paper, It looks like your company was legitimately paying these shell companies for actual work. The fake invoices were masterfully crafted, complete with detailed service descriptions and professional formatting. Someone had spent considerable time making the fraud look legitimate, which meant this wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was premeditated, ongoing theft that required significant planning and coordination. Sarah, this level of sophistication suggests they had professional help. Regular people don't just wake up one day knowing how to create shell companies and forge business documents. That's what I thought too, so I did some investigating. Sarah's eyes lit up with the satisfaction of a detective solving a complex case. It turns out Patricia's brother is a forensic accountant who was disbarred 3 years ago for helping clients hide assets during divorce proceedings. I found email communications between him and your father discussing business opportunities and maximizing family resources. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. This wasn't just my immediate family stealing from me, it was an extended network of relatives and associates who'd turned defrauding my business into their primary source of income. They'd built an entire criminal enterprise around my success, and I'd been completely oblivious. How much money are we talking about in total? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Sarah pulled out a spreadsheet that made my stomach drop. Conservatively, $1.8 million over 18 months. But Elena, that's just what I can definitively trace. There might be more contracts they modified before I started working here, or other schemes we haven't discovered yet. Nearly $2 million. Money that should have gone toward expanding my business, hiring additional staff, or investing in new technology. Instead, it had funded Patricia's kitchen renovation, Marcus's European vacation, Jessica's designer wardrobe, and Amanda's college expenses. They'd literally stolen my future to pay for their present luxuries. The most infuriating part is how they justified it to themselves, I said, thinking about their behavior at Thanksgiving dinner. They acted like I was the family disappointment while living off money they'd stolen from me. That's actually a common psychological pattern in family fraud cases, Sarah replied. The perpetrators often convince themselves that the victim owes them the money because of perceived slights or inequalities. Patricia probably told herself that you had more than you deserved, so taking some of it was just evening the score. The psychology made sense, but it didn't lessen the betrayal. If anything, it made their behavior more calculated and cruel. They hadn't just stolen my money, they'd systematically undermined my self-worth while doing it, making me feel like the unsuccessful family member who couldn't afford their lifestyle. At exactly 9 a.m., 3 federal agents arrived at my office, led by Special Agent Maria Rodriguez from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. She was younger than I'd expected, probably mid-30s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that comes from years of investigating white-collar criminals. Ms. Marchetti, I've reviewed the preliminary evidence your assistant provided, and I have to say, this is one of the most sophisticated family fraud schemes I've encountered. The level of organization and documentation is remarkable. Agent Rodriguez spread her own files across my conference table, showing bank records, wire transfer documentation, and surveillance photos I hadn't seen before. Apparently, the FBI had been building their own case file throughout the night. We've already secured warrants to freeze all accounts associated with the shell companies, she continued. VMC Holdings, Apex Holdings, Sterling Enterprises, and Meridian Solutions have all been flagged for suspicious activity. No money will be moving out of those accounts until this investigation is complete. The satisfaction was immediate and overwhelming. After months of watching my family flaunt their stolen wealth, knowing that their access to my money had been cut off felt like the first real victory in this nightmare. What happens next? I asked. We'll be executing search warrants at all family residences this afternoon. We're looking for additional documentation, computers, phones, and any physical evidence of the fraud. Given the sophistication of this operation, there's likely more evidence we haven't discovered yet, Sarah leaned forward with barely contained excitement. Agent Rodriguez, based on the evidence we've compiled, what kind of charges are we looking at? Wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Each family member involved could face 10 to 20 years in federal prison, plus full restitution and penalties. This isn't a case that gets plea bargained down to probation. The magnitude of what my family was facing began to sink in. They'd treated stealing from me like a casual family business, never considering that federal crimes carry federal consequences. Patricia's children had been living off stolen money while mocking my success, and now they were about to learn what real failure looked like. There's something else you should know, Agent Rodriguez continued. Based on the financial patterns we've identified, this type of organized fraud usually indicates other victims. We're going to be investigating whether your family has been running similar schemes against other businesses or individuals. The possibility that my family had been defrauding other people made my anger burn even hotter. I'd assumed I was their only victim, but criminals who are sophisticated enough to create multiple shell companies rarely limit themselves to a single target. Agent Rodriguez, I want to cooperate fully with this investigation. Whatever you need, from me or my company, you'll have it immediately. Actually, Ms. Marchetti, we'd like you to help us with the arrest phase. We're planning to execute warrants simultaneously at all family residences this afternoon, and having you present when we arrest your father might encourage him to cooperate rather than try to destroy evidence. The idea of watching Dad get arrested should have been devastating, but instead, I felt a sense of poetic justice. He'd spent 18 months making me feel like the family disappointment while systematically stealing from my business. Now, he was about to experience real disappointment in the form of federal criminal charges. I'll be there, I said without hesitation. After the agents left, Sarah and I spent the rest of the morning preparing damage control strategies for my business. Word of the fraud would eventually become public, and I needed to reassure my clients that Marchetti Consulting remained a trustworthy, legitimate operation. Elena, I think this situation might actually strengthen your business in the long run, Sarah observed as we drafted client communications. You've been the victim of sophisticated fraud, but you discovered it, reported it, and cooperated with law enforcement. That demonstrates exactly the kind of integrity and attention to detail that clients want in a consultant. She was right. My personal nightmare could become a professional asset, proving that I practice the same due diligence and ethical standards that I preach to my clients. Companies that hired me to investigate internal fraud would know that I understood the problem from both sides. At 2 p.m., my phone rang with a call from Agent Rodriguez. Ms. Marchetti, we're about to execute the warrants. Are you ready? I've been ready since yesterday, I replied, grabbing my coat and heading for the elevator. The drive to Dad's house felt surreal, like traveling back in time to a place that no longer existed. The family home where I'd grown up, where Mom had taught me about honesty and hard work, had become the headquarters of a criminal enterprise designed to steal from her daughter's business. 3 unmarked FBI vehicles were already parked on the street when I arrived, along with local police, units to assist with the arrests. Agent Rodriguez met me at the curb, her expression professional but understanding. Are you sure you want to be here for this? Family arrests can be emotionally difficult, even when the family members are criminals. Agent Rodriguez, these people spent 18 months making me feel like a failure while living off money they stole from me. I wouldn't miss this for anything. The front door opened before we could knock, and Dad appeared in the doorway looking confused and slightly annoyed. Behind him, I could see Patricia in the kitchen, probably starting dinner preparations with groceries bought using my stolen money. Elena, what are you doing here with all these police cars? Is everything all right? Agent Rodriguez stepped forward, her badge clearly visible. Vincent Marchetti, you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud in connection with the theft of funds from Marchetti Consulting. The color drained from Dad's face as he realized what was happening. His eyes found mine over Agent Rodriguez's shoulder, and for a moment, I saw the man who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped with my homework. But then I remembered the forged signatures, the shell companies, and the 18 months of systematic theft, and my sympathy evaporated. Elena, what is this? What's going on? This is justice, Dad. This is what happens when you steal nearly $2 million from your daughter's business while making her feel like the family disappointment. Patricia appeared behind him, her face a mask of shock and indignation. This is ridiculous. Vincent would never steal from Elena. Agent Rodriguez was already reading Dad his rights while other agents moved through the house with search warrants. Patricia's protests grew louder as she realized the scope of the investigation, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of agents systematically searching through closets, offices, and filing cabinets. Elena, you have to stop this, Patricia screamed as Dad was handcuffed and led toward a police car. This is your family. How can you do this to us? The same way you could steal from me while seating me in the corner at Thanksgiving dinner, I replied calmly. The difference is that what I'm doing is legal. Watching Dad being placed in the back of a police car should have been heartbreaking, but instead, it felt like closure. For 18 months, I'd questioned my own success, wondering why I couldn't afford the lifestyle my family seemed to enjoy so effortlessly. Now I knew the truth. They couldn't afford it either. They'd been living off stolen money while making me feel inadequate. Agent Rodriguez returned to where I was standing, her expression satisfied. We found boxes of documents in the basement. Office, including contracts with your forged signature, and correspondence with Patricia's brother about expanding their business opportunities. This case is going to be airtight. As the police cars pulled away with Dad in custody, I realized that this wasn't just about recovering stolen money or seeing criminals punished. This was about reclaiming my identity as a successful businesswoman and refusing to let family manipulation define my self-worth ever again. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Marcus, Jessica, and Amanda were all arrested at their respective addresses. All shell company accounts have been frozen. The nightmare is officially over. Standing in front of the house where I'd grown up, watching the end of my family as I'd known it, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Genuine pride in my own strength and integrity. Tomorrow, I would begin rebuilding my business and my life. But this time, I'd be building on a foundation of truth instead of lies. The real victory wasn't just stopping the theft or seeing the criminals arrested. The real victory was remembering who I was before they made me doubt myself. Elena Marchetti, successful entrepreneur and fraud investigator. Someone who didn't need to steal or lie to build a life worth living. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago felt like a cathedral of justice as I walked through its marble corridors 3 weeks after the arrests. My family's criminal enterprise had unraveled faster than anyone expected. But the real revelation wasn't just the scope of their fraud. It was discovering how their betrayal had actually positioned me to become stronger than I'd ever imagined possible. Sarah met me outside courtroom 7, her briefcase bulging with additional evidence we'd uncovered during the investigation. Elena, you're not going to believe what the forensic accountants found. Your family wasn't just stealing from you. They were planning to completely take over your business. She handed me a folder containing documents that made my blood run cold. Inside were draft incorporation papers for a company called Marchetti Family Enterprises, along with forged board resolutions that would have transferred ownership of my consulting firm to Dad as the senior family member with relevant business experience. They were going to stage a hostile takeover of my own company? I asked, scanning through the legal documents that bore my forged signature alongside fake notarizations. It gets worse. Patricia's brother had prepared paperwork to have you declared mentally incompetent to run your business due to stress and overwork. They had a doctor lined up who was willing to sign off on a psychological evaluation without ever meeting you. The audacity was breathtaking. Not content with stealing nearly $2 million, they'd been planning to steal my entire life's work and institutionalize me to prevent any resistance. The corner table at Thanksgiving dinner hadn't been casual disrespect. It had been a deliberate psychological campaign to make me doubt my own competence and success. Sarah, this changes everything. This wasn't just fraud. This was conspiracy to commit identity theft and potentially kidnapping. We need to get this information to Agent Rodriguez immediately. As we entered the courtroom, I saw my family for the first time since their arrests. Dad sat hunched over at the defendant's table, looking every one of his 68 years. Patricia was beside him, her designer clothes replaced with an orange jumpsuit that emphasized how far she'd fallen from her stolen luxury lifestyle. Marcus, Jessica, and Amanda occupied separate tables with their court-appointed attorneys, the reality of federal prison sentences having stripped away their earlier arrogance. But what struck me most wasn't their obvious distress. It was my own emotional response. Instead of feeling guilty or heartbroken, I felt a profound sense of liberation. These people had spent months making me question my own success while systematically planning to destroy everything I'd built. Their current situation wasn't my fault. It was the inevitable consequence of their own criminal choices. Judge Margaret Chen called the hearing to order, and Federal Prosecutor David Walsh stood to address the court. Your Honor, since the initial charges were filed, the government has uncovered evidence of an even more extensive criminal conspiracy involving not just financial fraud, but attempted corporate takeover through forged documents and conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. Walsh presented the Marchetti family enterprises documents to the judge, explaining how my family had planned to steal my business and have me declared incompetent if I discovered their scheme. The courtroom was silent as the full scope of their betrayal became clear. This case represents one of the most sophisticated family fraud conspiracies we've prosecuted, Walsh continued. The defendants didn't just steal money. They attempted to steal an entire identity and life's work through systematic psychological manipulation and document forgery. Judge Chen reviewed the evidence with the kind of careful attention that comes from years of seeing human beings at their worst. Mr. Marchetti, she said, addressing my father directly, you've pleaded guilty to wire fraud and money laundering. Do you have anything to say before sentencing? Dad stood shakily, his voice barely audible. Your Honor, I thought I was helping my family. Elena was so successful and we were struggling, and it seemed like she had more than she needed. The justification was exactly what I'd expected, the same twisted logic that had allowed them to steal from me while making me feel guilty for being successful. But hearing it in court, in front of a federal judge, exposed it for what it really was: pathetic, self-serving rationalization. Mr. Marchetti, Judge Chen replied sharply, you didn't just take money from your daughter. You forged her signature, created false companies, and planned to have her declared mentally incompetent so you could steal her business. This wasn't helping your family. This was destroying your daughter's life to fund your lifestyle. The judge's words hit like a physical blow, not to me, but to Dad, who seemed to realize for the first time the true magnitude of what he'd done. Patricia began crying loudly, her sobs echoing through the courtroom as the weight of federal prison sentences became real. When it came time for victim impact statements, I approached the podium with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. This wasn't just about punishment. This was about reclaiming my narrative and inspiring others who might be facing similar betrayals. Your Honor, my family didn't just steal money from me. They stole my sense of self-worth, my trust in family relationships, and my confidence in my own success. For 18 months, they made me feel like the family disappointment while living off money they'd stolen from my business. I looked directly at Dad as I spoke, wanting him to understand the full impact of his choices. The worst part wasn't the financial theft. It was the psychological manipulation. They seated me in the corner at family gatherings while wearing jewelry and clothes bought with my money, They mocked my success while secretly depending on it for their survival. The courtroom was completely silent as I continued. But here's what they didn't understand. By forcing me to investigate their fraud, they actually made me stronger. I discovered that I'm not just successful in spite of family pressure. I'm successful because I have the integrity and determination they lack. Judge Chen nodded approvingly as I explained how uncovering the fraud had reinforced my professional skills and ethical standards. This experience has taught me that real family supports your success instead of stealing from it. Real family celebrates your achievements instead of resenting them. And real family would never try to destroy your life to improve their own. When I finished speaking, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. The victim impact statement hadn't just been for the court, it had been a public declaration of my own worth and a rejection of the toxic family dynamics that had nearly destroyed my self-confidence. The sentences were swift and severe. Dad received 4 years in federal prison plus full restitution and penalties totaling $3 million. Patricia got 3 years for her role in the conspiracy. Marcus, Jessica, and Amanda each received 18 months plus individual restitution requirements. The judge made it clear that family fraud would be treated just as seriously as any other white-collar crime. As court officers led my family away in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't expected. Genuine pity. Not because they were going to prison, but because they'd chosen to build their lives on lies and theft instead of developing their own legitimate talents and ambitions. They'd had every opportunity to ask for help, to build honest relationships, to support each other's genuine success. Instead, they'd chosen betrayal, manipulation, and crime. Outside the courthouse, Agent Rodriguez approached me with a satisfied expression. Ms. Marchetti, I wanted you to know that your family's case has become a training example for our financial crimes division. The sophistication of their fraud scheme and the thoroughness of your cooperation have created a perfect case study for investigating family-based white-collar crime. The idea that my nightmare could help other fraud victims felt like the ultimate transformation of pain into purpose. Agent Rodriguez, I'd be willing to speak at training seminars or conferences if that would help other investigators understand family fraud patterns. Actually, we were hoping you'd say that. There's a national white-collar crime conference next month where we'd like you to present your case. Your perspective as both a fraud investigator and a fraud victim would be invaluable for law enforcement professionals. Walking back to my office that afternoon, I realized that the past month had fundamentally changed not just my family relationships, but my entire approach to business and life. The experience of being betrayed by people I trusted had paradoxically made me more trusting of genuine relationships while becoming much better at identifying manipulation and deception. Sarah was waiting in my office with news that seemed almost too good to be true. Elena, the publicity from the federal case has been incredible for business. We've had 12 new client inquiries this week, all specifically requesting the consultant who uncovered her own family's fraud scheme. She showed me emails from Fortune 500 companies that had read about my case in the business press. Instead of seeing me as a victim, they saw me as someone who possessed exactly the investigative skills and ethical standards they needed to protect their own organizations from internal fraud. There's more, Sarah continued, her excitement barely contained. Harvard Business School wants you to speak at their executive education program about family business ethics. The FBI Academy has requested you for their white-collar crime curriculum. And there's a publisher interested in a book deal about your experience. The opportunities were overwhelming, but they all pointed toward the same realization. My family's betrayal had accidentally created the perfect credentials for someone specializing in fraud investigation and business ethics. Their attempt to destroy me had actually positioned me to become more successful than ever before. That evening, I sat in my penthouse office, reviewing the day's events, and planning for a future that looked radically different from anything I'd imagined 6 months Earlier, my phone buzzed with a text from Tony, my younger brother, who had been the only family member not involved in the fraud scheme. Elena, I know this is incredibly awkward, but I want you to know that what Dad and Patricia did was unforgivable. You were right to turn them in, and I'm proud of you for having the strength to do it. I'd like to take you to dinner sometime if you're willing. I want to prove that not all family relationships have to be toxic. Tony's message was the first genuine family communication I'd received in months, and it reminded me that cutting out toxic relationships doesn't mean abandoning the possibility of healthy ones. Some family bonds were worth preserving, but only if they were based on mutual respect and genuine support, rather than manipulation and exploitation. I texted back, I'd like that. Let's start building the kind of family relationship Mom would have been proud of. The next morning brought a call that would reshape my entire business strategy. Dr. Michael Harrison from Northwestern University's Business School wanted to discuss creating a new graduate program focused on family business ethics and fraud prevention, with me as the founding director. Ms. Marchetti, your case has highlighted a significant gap in business education. We teach students about external threats to companies, but we don't adequately prepare them for internal threats from family members or trusted associates. Your experience gives you unique qualifications to develop curriculum that could protect thousands of businesses from similar fraud. The opportunity was exactly the kind of challenge I thrived on, taking a painful personal experience and transforming it into something that could help others avoid similar betrayals. Within weeks, I was working with Northwestern to develop case studies, ethical frameworks, and investigative techniques specifically designed to identify and prevent family-based business fraud. The program launched 6 months later with the largest enrollment in the business school's history. Students came from around the world to learn how to protect their companies and families from the kind of sophisticated fraud schemes that had nearly destroyed my business and self-worth. But the most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, a small business owner from Phoenix, sent me a letter explaining how my story had inspired her to investigate suspicious activity in her family restaurant. She'd discovered that her brother-in-law had been skimming from the cash register for over a year, and my example had given her the courage to involve law enforcement rather than handle it quietly within the family. Your story taught me that protecting your business isn't just about money. It's about protecting your dreams and your future, Maria wrote. I used to think that family loyalty meant accepting bad behavior, but now I understand that real loyalty means holding family members accountable for their choices. Letters like Maria's arrived regularly, each one reinforcing the lesson that my family's betrayal had accidentally prepared me to help others facing similar challenges. The corner table at Thanksgiving dinner, which had once symbolized my perceived failure, had actually been the beginning of my transformation into someone who could inspire others to value their own success and protect it from those who would steal or diminish it. A year after the arrests, I received a letter from Dad in federal prison. He'd been participating in counseling programs and wanted to apologize, not just for the theft, but for the psychological manipulation that had accompanied it. Elena, I realize now that my resentment of your success was really resentment of my own failures. Instead of being proud of what you accomplished, I felt threatened by it. I convinced myself that taking your money was justified because you had more than you needed. But the truth is that I was jealous of your talent and work ethic. The letter continued for several pages, detailing how Patricia had fed his insecurities and encouraged the fraud scheme by constantly comparing his retirement income to my business success. He acknowledged that their plan to take over my company had been motivated by a twisted desire to prove that he could run a business as successfully as I could. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve it, he wrote. But I want you to know that watching you handle this situation with such strength and integrity has made me prouder of you than I've ever been. You showed more character in exposing our crimes than I showed in my entire career. Reading Dad's letter, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Mom's death. Genuine hope for eventual healing. Not forgiveness, which might never come, but understanding that even the most toxic family relationships could potentially be transformed through accountability and genuine change. The letter went into my files alongside hundreds of others from fraud victims, law enforcement officials, and business students who had been inspired by my story. Each letter was a reminder that the worst betrayal of my life had become the foundation for the most meaningful work of my career. Standing in my expanded office suite, looking out at Lake Michigan and planning the next phase of my business growth, I realized that my family's attempt to destroy me had actually created something far more valuable than money. It had created purpose, resilience, and the unshakable knowledge that my success was built on integrity rather than manipulation. The corner table at Thanksgiving dinner had been intended to make me feel small and unsuccessful. Instead, it had been the launching pad for becoming larger and more successful than I'd ever dreamed possible. 2 years had passed since that life-changing Thanksgiving dinner, and I was standing on the stage of the Chicago Convention Center, looking out at an audience of 3,000 entrepreneurs, investigators, and business leaders who had gathered for the International Conference on Business Ethics and Family Dynamics. The journey from victim to keynote speaker had been extraordinary, but what truly amazed me was how many lives had been transformed by sharing the lessons learned from my family's betrayal. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying clearly, through the packed auditorium, "I want to tell you about the most valuable lesson I ever learned, and it came from the people who tried to destroy me." The audience leaned forward, and I could feel their collective energy as they prepared to hear a story that had already changed countless businesses and families around the world. Behind me, a massive screen displayed statistics that still took my breath away. Since going public with my story, the FBI had investigated over 400 similar family fraud cases, recovering more than $50 million for victims who had previously suffered in silence. My Northwestern University program had graduated its first class of certified family business ethics specialists, who were now working with companies across 6 continents to prevent internal fraud. "The most dangerous criminals aren't strangers who break into your business," I continued, sharing the podium with Agent Rodriguez, who had become a close friend and collaborator. "They're the people who already have your trust, your passwords, and your emotional vulnerabilities. They're the family members who make you feel guilty for being successful while they're literally living off your success." In the front row, I spotted Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic psychologist who had contacted me after reading about my case in the Harvard Business Review. She'd been studying the psychological patterns that make family members susceptible to financial manipulation, and our collaboration had resulted in a groundbreaking research paper that was now required reading in business schools nationwide. Dr. Chen's research has shown us that victims of family fraud typically experience what she calls success guilt, the feeling that achieving more than your relatives somehow makes you responsible for their failures, I explained, gesturing toward her. This psychological manipulation is often more damaging than the financial theft because it attacks your sense of self-worth and your right to enjoy the fruits of your own hard work. The presentation included video testimonials from dozens of people who had found the courage to confront family fraud after hearing my story. Maria Santos, the restaurant owner from Phoenix, had not only recovered the money her brother-in-law had stolen, but had expanded her business into a chain of 5 successful locations. She credited learning about family business boundaries with giving her the confidence to pursue growth without fear of exploitation. Another testimonial came from James Wu, a tech entrepreneur whose parents had been systematically draining his startup's accounts to fund their gambling addictions. "Elena's story taught me that enabling destructive behavior isn't love, it's complicity," James said in his video message. "After I stopped the theft and insisted on professional help for my parents, our family relationships actually improved because they were finally based on honesty instead of manipulation." But perhaps the most powerful segment of my presentation focused on the unexpected opportunities that had emerged from confronting the fraud. The screen behind me displayed a timeline showing how exposing my family's crimes had led to speaking. Engagements, consulting contracts, academic appointments, and business partnerships that had tripled my company's revenue while allowing me to help thousands of other entrepreneurs protect their dreams. Here's what criminals never understand, I said, my voice growing stronger with conviction. When you try to destroy someone with integrity, you often end up giving them exactly the experiences and credentials they need to become more successful than ever before. My family thought they were stealing my future. Instead, they accidentally gave me a better one. The audience erupted in applause, but I wasn't finished. The most important part of my message was still coming, the part about transforming pain into purpose and using betrayal as a catalyst for unprecedented growth. 6 months ago, I received a call that changed my perspective on this entire experience. I continued as the auditorium quieted. It was from the U.S. Department of Justice, asking me to head a new federal task force on family-based financial crimes. They wanted someone who understood the problem from both sides, as an investigator and as a victim. The task force position had been the opportunity of a lifetime, allowing me to work directly with law enforcement agencies, business schools, and victim advocacy groups to develop comprehensive strategies for preventing and prosecuting family fraud. My team had already helped draft new federal legislation that would make family-based financial crimes easier to prosecute and would provide better support for victims. But the real validation came from an unexpected source, I said, pausing for effect. Last month, I received a letter from Patricia, my former stepmother, who is currently serving her federal prison sentence. She wanted to tell me about a program she'd started in prison to help other inmates understand the real impact of their crimes on family members. The letter from Patricia had been 8 pages long, detailing how she'd spent 2 years in counseling and reflection, finally understanding the psychological damage her actions had caused. She'd organized workshops for inmates convicted of family fraud, helping them write genuine apology letters and develop plans for making amends after their release. Patricia wrote, "Elena, I realize now that we didn't just steal your money. We stole your sense of safety and belonging in your own family. I can't undo that damage, but I can help other people understand the true cost of betraying family trust before they destroy their own relationships." Reading Patricia's letter, to the audience, I felt the same complex mixture of emotions I'd experienced when it first arrived. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition that even the people who had hurt me most deeply were capable of growth and genuine remorse when forced to confront the consequences of their actions. The most powerful part of Patricia's program is that she requires participants to calculate not just the financial damage they caused, but the emotional and psychological costs to their victims. She makes them write detailed letters acknowledging every way their actions affected their family members' sense of self-worth, security, and ability to trust others. Agent Rodriguez joined me at the podium to discuss how Patricia's prison program had become a model for rehabilitation programs nationwide. We found that family fraud criminals who complete programs like Patricia's have significantly lower recidivism rates than those who simply serve their sentences without addressing the underlying psychological issues that led to their crimes. The collaboration with law enforcement had opened doors I never could have imagined. The FBI had asked me to develop training materials for agents investigating family fraud, and my curriculum was now being used by police departments in all 50 states. International law enforcement agencies had requested translations of my materials for use in countries where family business fraud was becoming increasingly sophisticated. But the most meaningful recognition had come from an organization I'd never heard of until they contacted me. The International Association of Fraud Examiners named me their Advocate of the Year for demonstrating how personal experiences with fraud could be transformed into professional expertise that protects others. The award citation read, "Elena Marchetti has shown that the most effective fraud investigators are often those who have experienced fraud personally and chosen to channel their pain into protecting others rather than simply seeking revenge," I shared with the audience. That recognition meant more to me than any financial recovery, because it validated the choice to use my family's betrayal as a foundation for helping others, rather than just a reason for bitterness. The presentation concluded with a segment about the Elena Marchetti Foundation, a nonprofit organization I'd established to provide legal and financial support for family fraud victims who couldn't afford private attorneys or forensic accountants. The foundation had already helped over 200 families recover stolen assets and rebuild their businesses after discovering internal theft. Many family fraud victims don't report the crimes because they can't afford the legal costs, or because they feel guilty about potentially sending relatives to prison, I explained. Our foundation provides free forensic accounting services, legal representation, and counseling support to help victims understand that protecting yourself from criminals isn't cruel, it's necessary for your survival and success. The Foundation's most innovative program paired family fraud survivors with victims who were just beginning their recovery journey. These mentorship relationships had proven incredibly effective at helping new victims understand that they weren't alone, and that recovery was not only possible, but could lead to greater success than they'd ever imagined. During the question and answer session, a young woman in the audience stood up with tears in her eyes. "Ms. Marchetti, my brother has been stealing from our family business for 3 years, and I've been afraid to confront him because I didn't want to destroy our family. Your story has given me the courage to realize that he's the one destroying our family, not me." Her comment sparked a wave of similar testimonials from audience members who had been struggling with family fraud but hadn't known how to address it. Each story reinforced the lesson that had taken me so long to learn. Protecting yourself from exploitation isn't selfish. It's essential for building the kind of life and business that can genuinely help others. After the conference, I returned to my office to find a stack of letters from people who had attended similar presentations around the country. One particularly moving letter came from Dr. Amanda Foster, a pediatric surgeon whose parents had been stealing from her medical practice to fund their luxury lifestyle. "Elena, your story saved my career and possibly my life," Dr. Foster wrote. "I had started questioning my own competence because I couldn't understand why I was working 80-hour weeks but never seemed to have enough money. When I discovered that my parents had been intercepting insurance payments and billing my practice for fake consulting fees, I realized that my problem wasn't incompetence. It was theft." Dr. Foster's situation had been remarkably similar to mine, with family members who criticized her lifestyle choices while secretly depending on stolen money to maintain their own standard of living. After exposing the fraud and cutting off her parents' access to her finances, she'd been able to expand her practice, hire additional staff, and establish a charitable clinic for underserved children. The most important lesson I learned from your example is that real family members want to see you succeed, not depend on your success while making you feel guilty about it, she continued. "My parents spent years telling me that I cared more about money than family, but the truth was that they cared more about my money than they cared about me." Letters like Dr. Foster's arrived daily, each one reminding me that the pain of family betrayal could be transformed into the strength needed to help others avoid similar situations. My assistant, Sarah, who had been promoted to director of operations as my business expanded, maintained a database of over 3,000 people who had reached out after hearing my story. "Elena, I've been thinking about something," Sarah said, during our weekly planning meeting. "Your family's crime created a ripple effect that has now helped thousands of people protect their businesses and rebuild their lives. In a weird way, their betrayal has generated more positive impact than they ever could have achieved through legitimate means." She was absolutely right. Dad's 4-year prison sentence had given him time to reflect on his choices and eventually become a mentor to other inmates struggling with gambling and financial problems. His letters had evolved from self-pity to genuine insight about the psychological patterns that had led him to justify stealing from his own daughter. Marcus, Jessica, and Amanda had each taken different paths during their shorter sentences. Marcus had earned his GED and was studying business administration through a prison correspondence program, writing to me that he wanted to build legitimate success instead of stealing someone else's. Jessica had become a prison librarian and was helping other inmates develop job skills for their eventual release. Amanda, the youngest, had perhaps made the most dramatic transformation. She'd used her prison time to earn college credits and had written a research paper about the psychological impact of family fraud on victims that had been published in a criminology journal. Her paper had been cited in academic research and legal briefs, turning her criminal experience into a contribution to understanding and preventing similar crimes. "The most interesting pattern I've observed," Amanda wrote in her latest letter, "is that family fraud victims often become more successful after exposure than they were before, because they're forced to develop skills and support systems that make them more resilient and self-reliant." Her observation aligned perfectly with my own experience and the testimonials I'd collected from hundreds of other family fraud survivors. The trauma of betrayal, when processed constructively rather than destructively, often created exactly the expertise and emotional strength needed for unprecedented success. This realization had led to the development of my most innovative program yet, the Family Fraud Survivor Success Network, which connected victims not just for emotional support, but for business collaboration and professional development. Members of the network had started companies together, created joint ventures, and built professional relationships based on mutual respect and genuine support, rather than manipulation and exploitation. The network's first annual conference was scheduled for the following month, featuring presentations from family fraud survivors who had transformed their experiences into business expertise, advocacy work, and community leadership. The keynote speaker would be Dr. James Richardson, a forensic psychiatrist whose siblings had embezzled from his practice, and who had subsequently developed revolutionary treatment programs for both fraud perpetrators and victims. As I prepared for that upcoming conference, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that humiliating Thanksgiving dinner, when I'd been seated in the corner while my family celebrated their stolen wealth. The corner table, which had been intended to symbolize my supposed failure and marginalization, had actually been the launching point for the most meaningful and successful phase of my entire career. The phone call from my assistant about their contract, the moment when I first learned about the systematic theft, had indeed changed everything, but not in the way my family had intended. Instead of destroying me, their betrayal had accidentally created the perfect foundation for building something far more valuable than money, a life devoted to helping others protect their dreams and transform their pain into power. Looking ahead to the future, I saw endless opportunities to expand this mission. Universities were requesting curriculum development, governments were asking for policy recommendations, and international organizations wanted to implement family fraud prevention, programs in developing economies where family businesses were particularly vulnerable to internal exploitation. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned to build new family relationships based on mutual respect and genuine support, rather than obligation and manipulation. Tony and I had developed a close sibling bond built on honesty and shared values. I'd also connected with extended relatives who had been estranged from our immediate family precisely because they'd refused to enable Dad and Patricia's increasingly destructive behavior. The corner table at Thanksgiving had taught me that true family isn't determined by blood relationships. It's created by people who celebrate your success instead of resenting it, who support your dreams instead of exploiting them, and who help you grow stronger instead of tearing you down to make themselves feel better. Standing in my office, surrounded by awards, testimonials, and photographs from speaking engagements around the world, I realized that my family's attempt to steal my future had actually given me a better one than I could have ever planned for myself. Their betrayal had forced me to discover strengths I didn't know I possessed and had connected me with thousands of people who shared my commitment to transforming pain into purpose. The assistant's call about their contract hadn't just exposed a crime. It had revealed a calling that would define the rest of my life and impact countless others for generations to come. 5 years after that pivotal Thanksgiving dinner, I found myself in the most unexpected place imaginable, sitting across from Dad in a federal halfway house conference room, not as his victim, but as his potential business partner. The journey from betrayal to this moment of potential redemption had been longer and more complex than any story I'd ever heard. But it represented the ultimate transformation of pain into purpose that I'd been teaching about around the world. "Elena, I know this seems impossible after everything I did," Dad said, his hands shaking slightly as he pushed a thick business plan across the table. "But I've spent 4 years thinking about how to make real amends. Not just apologizing, but actually creating something that helps other families avoid what we went through." The document he'd prepared was unlike anything I'd expected from someone I'd last seen in handcuffs. It outlined a comprehensive program called Second Chance Family Business Ethics, designed to help families who had experienced internal fraud rebuild their relationships while establishing new businesses, based on transparency and mutual accountability. "Dad, this is incredibly detailed," I said, flipping through pages of market research, financial projections, and operational frameworks. "Where did you learn to put together a business plan like this?" His face lit up with the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in years. "I've been working with Dr. Patricia Reeves, a business professor who volunteers at the halfway house. She's been helping inmates develop legitimate business skills instead of the manipulation tactics that got us here. Elena, I've learned more about real business ethics in the past 4 years than I did in 40 years of cutting corners and justifying bad decisions." Dr. Reeves had apparently become something of a legend in the federal prison system for her work with white-collar criminals, helping them transform their skills from exploitation to legitimate value creation. Dad's business plan was the culmination of 2 years of intensive study, including coursework in business ethics, family psychology, and restorative justice principles. "The program would work like this," Dad continued, his enthusiasm growing as he explained his vision. "Families dealing with internal fraud would go through a structured process: disclosure, accountability, restitution, and reconstruction. Instead of just punishing the criminals and leaving everyone to figure out how to move forward, we'd provide a roadmap for actually rebuilding trust and creating healthy business relationships." The concept was fascinating, but what struck me most was how thoroughly Dad seemed to understand the psychological dynamics that had led to our family's crisis. His analysis of enabling behaviors, resentment patterns, and communication breakdowns demonstrated a level of self-awareness that his old manipulative personality could never have achieved. "Dad, this is impressive work, but why are you bringing it to me? After everything that happened, wouldn't it be easier to start fresh with people who don't have our history?" His expression grew serious as he leaned forward. "Elena, that's exactly why it has to be you. If I can't make amends with my own daughter, how can I help other families heal from similar betrayals? This program only works if it's built on genuine reconciliation, not just theoretical knowledge." The request was both deeply personal and completely professional, which created a complexity I'd never encountered in any of my previous business decisions. Working with Dad would require me to risk the reputation and emotional stability I'd built over 5 years of recovery and success. But it also offered the possibility of creating something unprecedented: a business partnership between a fraud victim and perpetrator that could serve as a model for thousands of other families. "I need time to think about this," I said, gathering up the business plan. "And I'll need to discuss it with my team and advisors before making any decisions." "Of course," Dad replied. "Elena, I want you to know that if you decide this isn't right for you, I'll understand completely. You don't owe me anything, and you've already done more than I deserved by not giving up on the possibility that people can change." Driving back to Chicago from the halfway house, I found myself wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. Could someone who had betrayed me so completely ever be trusted again? Was it possible to build a healthy business relationship with a person who had systematically stolen from me for 18 months? And most importantly, would working with Dad inspire other families, or simply enable them to excuse inexcusable behavior? That evening, I called an emergency meeting with my core advisory team: Sarah, Agent Rodriguez, Dr. Chen, and Dr. Richardson, the psychiatrist who had become a close friend and mentor. I presented Dad's proposal and asked for their honest assessment of both the business opportunity and the personal risks involved. Elena, from a purely business perspective, this could be revolutionary, Dr. Richardson began. There's enormous demand for family reconciliation services in fraud cases, and having a program developed by both perpetrator and victim would give it incredible credibility. But the emotional risks to you could be substantial. Sarah, who had witnessed my entire journey from victim to advocate, was more cautious. Elena, your success has been built on helping people establish boundaries and protect themselves from family exploitation. Working with your father could send the wrong message to victims who aren't ready for reconciliation. Agent Rodriguez, ever the law enforcement professional, focused on the practical considerations. The program itself has merit, but Vincent would need to complete extensive background checks and compliance monitoring. Any business involving a convicted fraud perpetrator would need ironclad oversight mechanisms. Dr. Chen, whose research had been instrumental in my understanding of family fraud psychology, offered the most nuanced perspective. Elena, this decision really depends on whether you believe your father's transformation is genuine and sustainable. Has he truly changed, or is this just a more sophisticated form of manipulation? The question cut to the heart of everything I'd learned about family dynamics and criminal behavior. Dad's business plan was impressive. His apparent remorse seemed genuine, and his understanding of family fraud psychology was remarkably sophisticated. But he'd also been capable of 18 months of systematic deception while living under the same roof and sharing family meals. Over the next several weeks, I conducted what amounted to a comprehensive background investigation of my own father. I spoke with his counselors, reviewed his prison records, interviewed his halfway house supervisors, and even met with other inmates who had worked with him on various rehabilitation programs. The picture that emerged was of someone who had undergone a genuine and dramatic transformation. Dad had not only completed every available program related to financial crimes and family relationships, but he'd also become a mentor and advocate for other inmates struggling with gambling addictions and family estrangement. Your father has been one of our most successful rehabilitation cases, reported Dr. Michael Torres, the prison psychologist who had worked with Dad for 3 years. He's shown consistent progress in understanding the impact of his crimes, accepting responsibility for his choices, and developing genuine empathy for his victims. Most importantly, he's demonstrated this growth through actions, not just words. The actions Dr. Torres described were impressive. Dad had volunteered hundreds of hours counseling other inmates, had written and published articles about family fraud prevention, and had even testified before a congressional committee about the need for better rehabilitation programs for white-collar criminals. But the most convincing evidence of his transformation came from an unexpected source: Patricia, who had been released from prison 6 months earlier and was now working as a victim advocate for families affected by financial fraud. Elena. I was skeptical when Vincent first started talking about making amends, Patricia wrote in a lengthy email. I thought it was just another manipulation, another way of trying to get what he wanted. But over 4 years of group counseling and individual therapy, I watched him genuinely confront the selfishness and entitlement that led to our crimes. Patricia's email described how Dad had forced himself to understand not just the financial impact of the theft, but the emotional and psychological damage his actions had caused. He'd written detailed letters to every person affected by their fraud scheme, accepting full responsibility and offering specific plans for making amends. The most important change I've seen in Vincent is that he stopped making excuses and started making contributions, Patricia continued. He's not trying to minimize what we did or rush past the consequences. He's genuinely committed to spending the rest of his life helping other families avoid the mistakes we made. Armed with this information, I made a decision that surprised even me. I agreed to a 6-month trial partnership with Dad, with strict conditions and oversight mechanisms that would protect both my business and my emotional well-being. The announcement of our collaboration sent shockwaves through the family fraud prevention community. Some advocates praised it as a groundbreaking example of restorative justice, while others criticized it as enabling behavior that could encourage victims to prematurely reconcile with their abusers. Elena Marchetti's decision to work with her father represents either inspired leadership or dangerous naivety, wrote one prominent victim advocate. While her success story is inspiring, most family fraud perpetrators are not capable of genuine change, and this partnership could send the wrong message to vulnerable victims. The criticism stung, but it also forced me to articulate more clearly why I believed this partnership could help, rather than harm other families dealing with similar situations. I spent weeks refining our program structure to ensure it would never be used to pressure victims into premature forgiveness or unsafe reconciliation. The Second Chance program is not about forgiveness or family reconciliation, I explained in a widely read blog post. It's about creating structured pathways for perpetrators to make genuine amends while providing victims with additional resources and support. Participation is entirely voluntary, and the program explicitly states that victims have no obligation to maintain relationships with family members who have betrayed them. The first families to participate in our pilot program came from across the country, each dealing with different aspects of family fraud recovery. The Hendersons from Seattle were struggling with the aftermath of discovering that their son had embezzled from their family restaurant. The Patels from Miami were trying to rebuild their import business after the wife's brother had been stealing inventory and selling it independently. Working with these families alongside Dad was unlike any professional experience I'd ever had. His insights into the perpetrator mindset were invaluable for helping family members understand the psychology behind financial betrayal, while my perspective as a victim helped participants process the emotional impact of discovering that trusted relatives had been stealing from them. The most powerful part of the program is seeing Elena and Vincent work together, reflected Mrs. Henderson after completing the 6-week program. If they can rebuild a professional relationship after what he did to her, it gives us hope that our family might eventually heal from what our son did to us. But the program's success wasn't measured in reconciliation rates. It was measured in the participants' ability to establish healthy boundaries, make informed decisions about their relationships, and build businesses that were protected from future exploitation. 6 months into our partnership, the results exceeded every expectation. The Second Chance program had a waiting list of over 200 families, had been featured in major business publications, and had attracted interest from family courts looking for alternatives to traditional adversarial proceedings in financial fraud cases. More importantly, working with Dad had given me insights into family fraud prevention that I could never have gained from the victim's perspective alone. Understanding how perpetrators justified their actions, identified vulnerabilities, and maintained their deceptions had made me a more effective consultant and educator. Elena, I want you to know something, Dad said during one of our weekly planning meetings. Working with you has been the most meaningful experience of my life, not because it's given me a second chance, but because it's allowed me to see the incredible woman you became despite everything I did to try to hold you back. His comment caught me off guard, not because it was manipulative, but because it was so completely genuine. The man sitting across from me bore little resemblance to the person who had stolen from my business while making me feel like a family disappointment. This version of Dad was someone I could respect, even if I might never fully trust him with my personal finances. The transformation of our relationship from victim-perpetrator to business partners had taken nearly 2 years of careful rebuilding, structured interactions, and professional oversight. But it had resulted in something unprecedented, a model for how families could move beyond betrayal toward productive collaboration without ignoring the realities of past harm. Our success had attracted attention from unexpected quarters. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime had requested our program materials for international family business fraud prevention initiatives. Several countries were adapting our model for their own legal systems, and we'd been invited to present at conferences on 6 continents. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from the families we'd worked with directly. The Hendersons had not only rebuilt their restaurant business, but had expanded it into a regional chain. The Patels had developed new import partnerships and had become advocates for small business fraud prevention in their community. "Your program taught us that healing doesn't mean pretending the harm never happened," wrote Dr. Jennifer Park, whose sister had embezzled from their medical practice. "It means acknowledging the harm, learning from it, and using that knowledge to build something stronger than what existed before." Standing in our new office space, a facility that housed both the Second Chance program and the Elena Marchetti Foundation, I reflected on how far we'd all come from that corner table at Thanksgiving dinner. The humiliation and betrayal that had once seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of the most important work of my life. Dad's transformation from perpetrator to partner had been remarkable, but it had also been earned. Through years of consistent effort, genuine accountability, and unwavering commitment to making amends through service to others. Not every family fraud case would result in such reconciliation, nor should it, but our partnership had proven that even the most devastating betrayals could sometimes be transformed into opportunities for unprecedented growth and service. The corner table, which had once symbolized my supposed failure and marginalization, had become the foundation for a business empire built on helping families protect their dreams and transform their pain into power. And the assistant's call about the contract, which had initially seemed like the beginning of my nightmare, had actually been the first step toward the most fulfilling and successful chapter of my entire life. The journey from betrayal to partnership had taught me that the most powerful revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's becoming so successful at helping others that their attempt to harm you accidentally becomes the catalyst for touching thousands of lives in positive ways they could never have imagined. 10 years had passed since that fateful Thanksgiving dinner, and I was standing in the boardroom of Marchetti Global Solutions, preparing to announce the most ambitious project of my career. The company had grown from a small consulting firm into an international organization with offices in 12 countries. But what I was about to propose would dwarf everything we'd accomplished so far. A comprehensive global initiative to prevent family fraud before it started, reaching millions of families through education, technology, and community support. "Ladies and gentlemen," I addressed the board of directors, which now included former FBI Director James Morrison, Harvard Business School, Dean Dr. Elizabeth Warren, and 3 prominent family business owners who had overcome their own internal fraud challenges. Today marks the launch of the Global Family Integrity Project, our plan to eliminate family-based financial crime within a generation. The presentation I was about to give represented 5 years of research, development, and testing across multiple continents, working with sociologists, economists, psychologists, and law enforcement agencies. We'd identified the root causes of family fraud and developed prevention strategies that addressed everything from childhood financial education to cultural attitudes about success and family obligation. Behind me, the massive conference room screen displayed statistics that still amazed me. Our programs had now helped over 50,000 families worldwide, prevented an estimated $200 million in family fraud, and created a network of certified professionals working in 37 countries. But these numbers, impressive as they were, only represented the beginning of what we could accomplish. Dr. Sarah Martinez, our Director of Global Research, will present our findings on the psychological and cultural factors that make certain families vulnerable to internal fraud, I announced, stepping aside for the brilliant criminologist who had joined our team 3 years earlier after studying family fraud patterns across different cultures. Dr. Martinez had made discoveries that revolutionized our understanding of family fraud prevention. Her research showed that families with certain communication patterns, financial management styles, and success dynamics were significantly more likely to experience internal theft, regardless of their economic status or cultural background. Our studies across 43 countries have identified 5 critical warning signs that predict family fraud with 92% accuracy, Dr. Martinez explained, displaying her groundbreaking research. Families where success is resented rather than celebrated, where financial decisions are made in secret, where there's significant income disparity between family members, where guilt is used to manipulate financial choices, and where boundaries between personal and business finances are unclear. The research had practical applications that were already being implemented in business schools, family therapy programs, and community organizations worldwide. Instead of waiting for fraud to occur and then responding to it, we could now help families recognize and address vulnerability patterns before they led to criminal behavior. Based on these findings, we've developed the Family Integrity Assessment, a comprehensive evaluation tool that helps families identify their risk factors and implement protective strategies, I continued, retaking the podium. But more importantly, we've created intervention programs that address the underlying psychological and cultural issues that make family fraud possible. The intervention programs were perhaps our most innovative achievement. Rather than simply teaching people how to detect fraud, we helped families develop healthy communication patterns, establish appropriate financial boundaries, and create support systems that celebrated individual success while maintaining family connections. One of our most successful programs was the Young Entrepreneur Family Support Network, which provided guidance for families where one member had achieved significantly more financial success than others. These families learned how to navigate income disparities without resentment, exploitation, or guilt, preventing the kind of toxic dynamics that had nearly destroyed my own family. I'd like to share a video message from the Chen family in Singapore, who completed our program 3 years ago, I announced as the screen switched to a recorded testimonial. David Chen, a software entrepreneur whose rapid success had created tension with his extended family, appeared on screen with his parents, siblings, and cousins. 3 years ago, our family was heading toward the same kind of crisis that Elena experienced, David explained. My success was creating resentment. Family members were making inappropriate financial requests, and I was starting to feel guilty about my achievements. The Chen family's transformation had been remarkable. Through our program, they'd learned to celebrate David's success as a family achievement, while establishing clear boundaries about financial support and business involvement. Instead of creating resentment or exploitation, David's wealth had become a source of family pride and an opportunity for everyone to develop their own entrepreneurial skills. The most important lesson we learned is that family support doesn't mean enabling bad behavior or sacrificing your own success to make others comfortable, David's mother added. Real love means helping each other grow stronger, not holding each other back or living off each other's achievements. Similar success stories were pouring in from families around the world who had used our programs to prevent fraud, resolve conflicts, and build healthier relationships. The Johnson family in London had avoided a crisis when the eldest son's gambling addiction led him to consider stealing from the family restaurant. The program had helped them intervene early, get him professional help, and establish safeguards that protected the business while supporting his recovery. But perhaps the most moving testimonial came from an unexpected source. Marcus, my former stepbrother, who had completed his prison sentence and was now working as a certified family fraud prevention specialist. Elena's program saved my life, in ways I never expected, Marcus said in his video message from the community center where he now worked with at-risk families. Not only did it help me understand why I made such destructive choices, but it gave me the tools to help other people avoid the same mistakes. Marcus had become one of our most effective counselors precisely because of his personal experience with family fraud. His ability to recognize manipulation tactics, understand perpetrator psychology, and connect with families in crisis had made him invaluable in our prevention efforts. Working with families who are dealing with internal theft has taught me something profound, Marcus continued. The real tragedy isn't just the money that gets stolen, it's the relationships that get destroyed and the potential that gets wasted. Elena's program helps families redirect that destructive energy into something positive and productive. His transformation from perpetrator to prevention specialist represented one of our program's most important innovations, the integration of reformed offenders as counselors and educators. Former family fraud perpetrators who had completed comprehensive rehabilitation programs brought unique insights that traditional counselors couldn't provide. This approach had been controversial initially, with some critics arguing that using former criminals as counselors could normalize or excuse fraudulent behavior. But our results spoke for themselves. Families counseled by reformed perpetrators showed significantly higher rates of fraud prevention and healthier conflict resolution compared to those who worked only with traditional therapists. The next phase of the Global Family Integrity Project involves something unprecedented, I announced, moving to the most ambitious part of our presentation. We're partnering with the United Nations, the World Bank, and major technology companies to create a global early warning system for family fraud. The technology component of our initiative was revolutionary. Using artificial intelligence and pattern recognition software, we'd developed algorithms that could identify families at high risk for internal fraud based on financial behavior patterns, communication indicators, and social media activity. The system works like this, explained Dr. James Kim, our Director of Technology Innovation, as he demonstrated the software. Financial institutions, family therapists, and community organizations can input anonymous data about family dynamics and financial patterns. The AI analyzes this information and provides risk assessments along with specific intervention recommendations. The technology wasn't designed to spy on families or predict crimes with certainty, but rather to identify situations where preventive intervention could be most helpful. Banks could offer financial counseling to families showing warning signs. Therapists could suggest communication workshops, and community organizations could provide support before problems escalated to criminal behavior. Privacy protections were built into every aspect of the system, with multiple oversight mechanisms to prevent misuse. The goal wasn't surveillance, but rather the same kind of early intervention that had proven so effective in preventing other social problems like domestic violence and substance abuse. We're also launching the Global Family Success Scholarship Program, I continued, outlining another major initiative. This program will provide educational opportunities for family members who might otherwise feel left behind when relatives achieve significant success. The scholarship program addressed one of the root causes of family fraud, the resentment that could develop when one family member achieved significantly more success than others. Instead of allowing these disparities to create conflict, we would provide pathways for everyone to develop their own potential. Recipients would receive not just financial support for education, but also mentoring, career guidance, and access to our network of successful entrepreneurs and professionals. The goal was to transform potential resentment into motivation, creating families where everyone's success contributed to collective achievement rather than individual isolation. Our first scholarship recipient is someone who exemplifies the transformation we hope to achieve, I announced as the screen displayed a photo of Amanda, my former stepsister, who had completed her master's degree in criminology while serving her sentence and was now pursuing a PhD in family psychology. Amanda's research had become some of the most influential work in our field, focusing on the long-term psychological effects of family fraud on both perpetrators and victims. Her insights had helped us develop more effective counseling programs and had contributed to our understanding of how families could heal from betrayal. Amanda's journey from perpetrator to researcher demonstrates that people can transform their mistakes into contributions that help others avoid similar problems, I explained. Her scholarship will support her doctoral research on family fraud, prevention in developing countries, expanding our understanding of how cultural and economic factors influence internal theft patterns. The room was silent as board members absorbed the scope of what we were proposing. The Global Family Integrity Project represented not just an expansion of our existing work, but a fundamental shift toward preventing family fraud on a societal level rather than simply responding to individual cases. The financial requirements for this initiative are substantial, I acknowledged, displaying our budget projections. We're requesting $50 million over 5 years to establish programs in 100 countries, train 10,000 prevention specialists, and develop technology platforms that can serve millions of families. The investment was significant, but so was the potential return. Our economic analysis showed that preventing family fraud could save the global economy billions of dollars annually while preserving countless family relationships and business enterprises. Board member Patricia Williams, CEO of Williams Family Enterprises, and herself a family fraud survivor, was the first to speak. Elena, this is the most comprehensive approach to family fraud prevention I've ever seen. The integration of research, technology, education, and direct intervention could genuinely transform how families handle success and financial relationships. Other board members echoed her enthusiasm, but also raised important questions about implementation, cultural sensitivity, and measurement of success. Dr. Warren expressed particular interest in the educational components, suggesting partnerships with business schools worldwide to integrate family integrity training into entrepreneurship curricula. The most compelling aspect of this proposal is its focus on prevention rather than punishment, observed James Morrison, the former FBI director. Law enforcement has been fighting family fraud for decades, but we've always been reactive. This initiative offers the possibility of actually eliminating the problem rather than just prosecuting its symptoms. The discussion that followed was intense and detailed, covering everything from funding mechanisms to ethical considerations to international legal frameworks. But by the end of the 4-hour meeting, the board had unanimously approved the initiative, with several members volunteering to serve as ambassadors to potential partner organizations. Walking back to my office after the board meeting, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me to this moment. The corner table at Thanksgiving dinner, which had once represented the lowest point of my life, had somehow led to the opportunity to prevent millions of other families from experiencing similar betrayals. Sarah, now executive vice president of the company, was waiting with updates on our current programs and preliminary responses to the morning's announcement. Elena, we've already received calls from the European Union, the African Development Bank, and 3 major technology companies, wanting to discuss partnerships. Word travels fast in this industry. The response was gratifying, but not entirely surprising. Family fraud had become a recognized global problem, and organizations worldwide were looking for effective solutions. Our track record of success, combined with the comprehensive nature of our new initiative, positioned us as the obvious leaders in prevention efforts. There's something else, Sarah continued, her expression mixing excitement with concern. We've received a request from the State Department to brief congressional committees on family fraud as a national security issue. Apparently, some intelligence agencies are concerned about how family-based financial crimes might be exploited by foreign actors or terrorist organizations. The national security implications of family fraud were something we'd been studying quietly for several years. Criminal organizations had begun targeting successful immigrant families, exploiting cultural obligations and family loyalties to gain access to legitimate businesses that could be used for money laundering or other illegal activities. Schedule the briefing, I decided. If our work can help protect national security while preventing family fraud, that's an opportunity we need to pursue. As Sarah left to make arrangements, I stood at my office window looking out at the Chicago skyline, thinking about how dramatically my life had changed since that humiliating Thanksgiving dinner. The woman who had once sat in the corner while her family celebrated their stolen wealth was now leading a global initiative that could protect millions of families from similar betrayals. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick. It had required years of painful healing, professional development, and the courage to turn personal trauma into public service. But every challenge had ultimately contributed to building something larger and more meaningful than anything I could have achieved without experiencing the depths of family betrayal. My phone buzzed with a text message from Dad, who was now the Director of Perpetrator Rehabilitation Services for our organization. Elena, just finished reviewing the Global Initiative proposal. Mom would be so proud of what you've built from such a difficult beginning. Thank you for showing me that redemption is possible when you're willing to do the work. Reading his message, I felt the complex mixture of emotions that had defined our rebuilt relationship. Not complete trust, but genuine respect. Not unconditional love, but deep appreciation for the growth we'd both achieved. Our partnership had proven that even the most devastating betrayals could sometimes be transformed into opportunities for unprecedented service and success. The corner table at Thanksgiving had been intended to diminish me, to make me feel unsuccessful and unworthy of my family's respect. Instead, it had become the launching pad for building a global organization dedicated to ensuring that no other families would have to experience the pain of internal betrayal. The assistant's call about the contract, which had initially seemed like the beginning of a nightmare, had actually been the first step toward the most meaningful and successful work of my life. And now, with the Global Family Integrity Project, that single phone call was about to impact millions of families worldwide, preventing fraud, preserving relationships, and protecting dreams on a scale I could never have imagined. The journey from victim to global leader had taught me that our greatest wounds, when properly healed and channeled, often become our greatest strengths. The pain of family betrayal had given me unique insights into fraud prevention. The trauma of public humiliation had taught me resilience and empathy, and the experience of rebuilding trust had shown me how to help others navigate similar challenges. Standing in my office, surrounded by evidence of how far we'd come and plans for how much further we could go, I realized that the corner table had actually been the perfect place for me to sit. Not because I deserved less than my family, but because it had given me the perspective I needed to build something greater than any of us had ever imagined possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.